what is more important, the crimes Diddy is accused of or taking pictures of pieces of paper?
What is more important is everyone's constitutional rights. So the thing that I tell everyone is that your constitutional rights were built on the back of bad guys. Miranda was someone who confessed to a crime, right? He did it. He confessed to it. But we all now have Miranda rights because he wasn't properly advised that he didn't have to under the Sixth and the Fifth Amendment, right? We have the right to walk away from police officers when they stop us and frisk us. We don't have to stay there and be stopped and frisked. You have Terry to thank for that. Your right to have an attorney free of charge if you can't afford one. You can thank Mr. Gideon for that. He was a bad guy. He was convicted of crimes. Sean P. Diddy Combs might be an allegedly bad guy, but if you don't uphold everyone's right to counsel off of the back of these bad people, you don't get your rights. So later on, if you are alleged to have done something that you didn't actually do, and then the police or the state is able to go in and look at your letters back and forth to your attorney and use them against you, then you would have lost your rights because of a case like this. That's why this
Yeah.
is more important than that.
Very, very well said. And let me just add one more thing, particularly in high-profile cases, particularly where you have defendants who are accused of egregious conduct. I will say it becomes, I mean, it's important in every case, but for those who believe that he's automatically guilty, for those who believe it's just we have to go through the pro forma of a trial, the last thing that you want is a criminal defendant's rights to be violated in some way pre-trial because, and correct me if I'm wrong, what could happen is they get convicted, they have grounds for appeal, this conviction gets overturned, you got to start the whole process again. It's not even necessary you have a second trial. It won't be as strong as the first time around. So anybody who really wants justice in this case, who already thinks that Sean Combs is guilty, just keep that in mind. Now, I want to actually go to you, Natalie. One more thing. We have an update from court. This looks like we have now a timetable. So the judge says we have a bail hearing on Friday at which I will not consider these materials. In terms of running down the privilege issues, that can take weeks. Any issue with that time frame? Sean Combs' lawyer says no. The judge says I'll issue a schedule. Sean Combs' lawyer says if they are intending to seek a superseding indictment with these notes, the judge asks the prosecutor, and the prosecutor says, just to be clear, the filter team can keep the notes. The judge says if they're not involved in the grand jury investigation or this case. Multiple points there, Natalie. You talk about what you want to hit first.
Yeah, so first of all, off the bat, I can't tell the judge's tone of voice, but immediately there's a sanction on the prosecution. And that is the prosecution is seeking to oppose Sean P. Diddy Combs' release from jail because of alleged witness tampering. However, they got to that witness tampering by intercepting attorney-client privilege, and so they cannot use it. So that is basically a ruling that, at least for that bit of information, it's a possibility that that was attorney-client privilege. They didn't take the necessary safeguards, and now they can't use it. Doesn't mean Diddy's going to get released, but it means it's a lot better for the defense that they cannot use that. We also now know that there is a potential for a superseding indictment, likely adding on charges of obstruction of justice. But if it's found that that indictment was generated as a result of the violation of attorney-client privilege and work product, then more than likely that indictment is not going to stand. They might have killed their own case by the way in which they gathered this evidence. So those are the things that pop up in my mind.
Saf, I'll give you an opportunity to respond if you agree with Natalie, but also throw this out. We have a question from Tiffany Marcinak on YouTube. If not a dismissal, which doesn't seem to be what the case is, I wonder if this is used to grant him bail. So again, the question is, how does this affect Friday?
Definitely. So I 1000% agree with Natalie to answer your question first and foremost. To the issue of bail, I don't think that these things are going to be considered for bail. And in fact, it appears that the prosecution tried to use some of this information in opposition to Mr. Combs' bail application, but the judge seems to be striking certain parts from that opposition or is not going to consider those parts of that, of those documents or whatever they might be for the bail application.
Big update from court. Okay, so this is interesting. First, the judge says, Sean Combs' lawyer says they should preserve the video. The prosecution says fine. This is the part I want to address. So, Natalie, the judge says, what about the Jeffries case in Eastern District of New York? Talking about Mike Jeffries, who was arrested on sex trafficking. The judge says the government released him on a $10 million bail. This is in the Eastern District of New York. Be prepared to address the difference there. And the prosecutor says it's very different. That was one of the arguments, Natalie, that Sean Combs' defense team raised. Another high-profile individual. Why does he get $10 million bail and my client doesn't? Wow, the fact that the judge might be entertaining that.
Yes, I think that's very interesting. I don't know with the Jeffries case if there's any allegation of witness tampering. We know that before this raid and the interception of attorney-client work product privilege, the prosecution had already raised that Sean P. Diddy Combs was reaching out to witnesses, but that was a bit more ephemeral. They couldn't exactly say what he was saying to these witnesses, and he had not yet been indicted. And now with the judge saying he's not going to consider the new information, they are going to have to distinguish him from the other case. Why is that important? Because it's important to have fairness across the board, right? So similarly situated defendants charged with the same thing should have similar bail and release conditions. There shouldn't be differences if they're pretty much the same. So that's very interesting. And I'm think it's going to rise and fall on the previous allegations that were made of witness tampering.
So I want to let everybody know that the hearing is over. The judge is now going to see both parties on Friday for that bail hearing. We plan to cover it here on Law and Crime the very same way, but I don't want anybody to go anywhere because we're waiting for Elizabeth Milner to come out of that courthouse, give us an update about what she observed inside that courtroom, including what she observed of Sean Combs. Did he make any statements? Did he say anything? Did he look in a certain direction? Because something's still probably going on in that courtroom. He might be, maybe he said something or motioned something to his family. It'll be interesting to hear. And also things that weren't picked up during the course of this these live updates. But what's also interesting is I don't think we're going to hear any press statements, Safa, right? I don't think we're going to hear anything from the prosecutors or the defense because there's a gag order in place, right? There's only so much that they can say. I mean, it's about not disclosing certain information about the case. It's not about, they also can't reveal grand jury material. Do you anticipate we're going to hear any pressers after this?
I don't think so. And if anything, I don't think that we're going to hear from the prosecution. And I think it's best at this point for them to keep quiet, considering the tire fire that's been created and why we're even having this discussion today. That's number one. Number two, if we hear a statement from Mr. Agnifilo, that is a possibility. But right now, I think it's best that everybody just sort of takes a pause and kind of keeps quiet, especially with the defense. They could be looking at a huge win for their case, and they don't want to say anything or do anything that could potentially jeopardize what's going to come down this coming Friday or in the future for their case.
Got some questions as we wait for Elizabeth to come out. The question from Cole on YouTube. Why did the judge consider the Jeffries case before? I guess it's why didn't the judge consider the Jeffries case before? I would say the timing of it, because Sean Combs had already been denied bail twice. Then Jeffries gets arrested and charged, and this issue hasn't become before a court yet. There was Sean Combs' team was actually appealing this to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, paused that in order to now argue this in front of the most recent judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. So again, he seems to be the first judge to handle this issue and has already commented on it. All right, so I have a question for you, Natalie. This is from Bright Essen on YouTube. So because it seems like he got a relatively early trial date, does that mean his case will be resolved much more quickly than usual court cases of this magnitude, or will it take years and years?
It will take years and years, but I'm doubtful given we're just in the pretrial release stage. We haven't even gotten to motions, right? I doubt this case will be tried on the currently set trial date, hopefully not years and years, but these prosecutions do take a long time.
May of 2025, which is an interesting argument, Safa, because in the prosecution's most recent filing on bail, they addressed one of the defense's concerns, because the defense said, look, he needs bail. He needs to be out because the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, is not adequate for him to prepare for trial. It's not adequate for him to review all the discovery in this case. And the prosecution responded, no, it's adequate. He has a separate room. He can communicate with his lawyers. And by the way, if he needs more time preparing, let's adjourn the trial date. He's the one who wanted May 2025. Why don't we push it out then? What do you think about that argument, Safa?
Well, Mr. Combs and every American has a constitutional right to a speedy trial. That's number one. So that's why we're seeing that trial date that's been scheduled for May 2025. So that's the first thing. Not only that, but it's always easier for us to meet with our clients and confer and all of those sorts of things with our clients out of custody. Yes, they have a room, they have all of these mechanisms and means for us to meet and discuss our case with our clients, but there's nothing like having your client come into your office or into your boardroom, throw a body camera on TV or throw any kind of footage on the TV and be able to look at that themselves. And sometimes our systems aren't as well equipped when we have to transport our computers and recordings and all of those sorts of things into the jail. More often than not, it's always easier, and it's definitely best for us to have our clients out of custody as we continue to prepare for trial. And it makes for a more meaningful defense when we're able to do that.
It is interesting, Natalie, thinking about this issue of bail on Friday, which I think is going to be fascinating. I've been following it for weeks. Because if you take the prosecution's arguments as true, that he has been improperly contacting people from jail, that he's been using other inmates' PAC numbers to make phone calls, that he's been engaging third parties to reach out to witnesses, the question becomes, why should we trust him on the outside in what would essentially be a home prison, 24/7 monitoring, visitor logs, only family members would show up? Because the prosecution is saying he's enlisting family members to do his bidding. He might get the security team to bend the rules a little bit. You think it's a stretch for him to make bail on Friday?
It's going to be difficult for him. He still remains a flight risk, just as a function of his wealth. And he does have particular allegations against him. We can't really think about the ones from his jail cell. The other ones, though, that he has massive power and influence over people. And so the government's best argument is that the only way to control and stop that so that they can have integrity in their case is to keep him incarcerated so that they can legally intercept his communications. Because like I said, he has no right to privacy. All of his phone calls will be intercepted. So that is the strongest argument for the prosecution. But then on the other side, did the prosecution kind of give that up by overstepping their bounds and intercepting his attorney-client communications and making it so that he cannot safely prepare for his case because he must always be in fear that the government is going to go in and try and get into his trial strategy?
Safa, your thoughts on bail on Friday?
I don't think that, unfortunately, Mr. Combs is going to make bail. It certainly is a possibility, and it'll be interesting to see how the judge takes those two cases into consideration. The likelihood of him getting bail, I doubt it. There doesn't appear to be a significant change in circumstances either, but for the disclosure of the attorney-client privilege information. And so if the judge looks at that and says, hey, this is important enough to me, this was so egregious on the prosecution's part that I'm going to grant Mr. Combs bail because I want to safeguard his rights and ensure that he can prepare his case with the integrity of his attorneys, then I'm going to grant that and I'm going to allow it.
All right, tell you what we're going to do. Safa, we're going to sign you off. You've been so generous with your time. Natalie, stick with us. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're hoping to get Elizabeth Milner on, who is inside that courtroom. She'll give her perspective, her observations about what happened there. Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this. Back to Law and Crime, everybody. So we are having this special coverage right now of Sean Diddy Combs' case. He was just in that courtroom where there was an issue, a discussion about whether or not the government violated the attorney-client privilege, violated his constitutional rights by improperly taking or photographing material from his jail cell. And at the end of the day, the judge said there is certain material that will now no longer be discussed on Friday when the issue of Sean Combs' bail comes into play. And the issue of whether or not there was an attorney-client privilege violation, that's going to take a little bit more time, could take several weeks, but in the immediate effect is that certain parts of what the government was planning to introduce or argue will not come in on Friday. Now, we are joined by Elizabeth Milner, Law and Crime's very own, who is inside that courtroom, inside that federal courtroom. Elizabeth, talk to us about what the scene was like, the atmosphere, what Sean Combs looked like. Was his family there? Because unfortunately we don't have cameras. You are our eyes and ears.
Yeah, that's right, Jesse. And of course, I brought my handy dandy notebook once again because, like, as you just mentioned, no electronic devices unless you have a particular permit and an order from the judge are you allowed to bring that inside federal courtroom. So we had to do it the old-fashioned way, a pen and paper and a notebook. So I actually got into courtroom or the courthouse, I should say, around 2:15, and thank goodness I did because it really paid off because it was kind of stacked as far as a lot of press trying to get inside that hearing, and I was very lucky to be able to sit inside the gallery because a lot of journalists were worried that they weren't even going to be able to make it into the hearing. The hearing was on a completely different floor than it was last time in a lot smaller of a courtroom, and really lucked out being able to sit in the gallery kind of on the right side, just like I was sitting last hearing in October. But you know, a big difference in this hearing compared to last is Diddy's family wasn't even inside the courtroom. They didn't appear inside court today, likely because this was an emergency hearing and we just got notification of it literally yesterday. So no sign of his sons, no signs of his daughters, no signs of his mother inside that courtroom hearing. But one thing that, and I guess I should say, it doesn't really surprise me as much anymore, but it is Diddy's demeanor. I was expecting, because his family wasn't here, for him to be a little more somber, a little more defeated in a way, but that is not Diddy. Literally, his motto, besides being a bad boy for life, is can't stop, won't stop, and you cannot stop that confidence that he has when he appears inside the courtroom. I was very surprised to see that he had come inside. He had kind of smiled at the gallery. I felt in a way he even made eye contact with me, which was very kind of bizarre in a way, but at the same time, he was just appearing as that confident Sean Diddy Combs that we have seen plenty of times in the images, of course, in the stories that we have covered prior. And again, he was an enamored figure once ago, but you know, you would think that being about to be on trial for sex trafficking charges, that he would feel defeated. Being in a detention center for the last 2 months, he would feel defeated, but that was not the case. He appeared very jovial. He was very very focused in the sense of when the defense was making their arguments to the judge, Combs was sitting at the defense table, nodding his head along. He was taking notes. He was passing notes to his defense attorneys. But then at the same time, you could also tell, going back to when he had first come inside that courtroom, was that I think he recognizes that a lot of people are watching him. There's never going to be a moment out of our mouths that we say Sean Combs looked defeated, because again, all eyes are on him. So he's going to make sure everyone is aware that he is in upper or higher spirits, I should say, as he's kind of battling this very heavy court case. But again, when he was inside that courtroom, he was very laser focused. He was, when the judge was asking about the notes and the whole debacle that was going on about that, Combs appeared very adamant that these were legal notes that were taken. They did violate attorney-client privilege. But again, you know, what else are we expecting from a man other than Sean Diddy Combs?
There's one thing that's so interesting about that description. Two things. One, you know, the first time we heard Sean Combs recently was on that happy birthday call from his family, and he actually sounded, on the other line, jovial. So I'm not surprised you saying that he kind of has this upbeat mentality. I am very curious about the judge's demeanor. So we were reading kind of the transcript about what the judge was saying, but in your best guess, the way the judge was responding to the prosecution, did he seem annoyed at the prosecution? Did he seem to be more aligned with the defense? Because based on the transcript, it seemed he was not only open to the defense's accusations, the defense's claims, but he seemed to side with them a little bit. What was his demeanor like?
Yeah, for sure. And you picked that up 1,000%, even from outside the courthouse. It felt that way, too. It felt like the judge was very no nonsense. The judge had a lot of follow-up questions for the government and their arguments about what kind of occurred, how it occurred, all of that sort. And so it did appear that the defense was going to get a win in this case. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see how Friday all plays out. But I gather that the judge was very much no nonsense when it comes to kind of siding with the defense on whether or not that Fourth Amendment and that attorney-client privilege was violated. And I thought for a second there, the government didn't sound as kind of put together as they should have been, because in this case, when you're dealing with somebody like Sean Diddy Combs, you have to cross your T's, dot all your I's, and make sure your ducks are in a row. So I was actually kind of surprised at the government's arguments of everything that kind of occurred, where it was either that, you know, they didn't feel the defense needed to hear or see these types of items. They didn't feel that they needed to be in their possession. And so the the judge kind of called them out on it. And I was very surprised that, thinking that the defense would get a win in this argument, but we're going to continue, to wait and see how this all plays out, especially on Friday.
Yeah, it's interesting because maybe the prosecution wasn't prepared because this was kind of an emergency hearing requested by the defense. They were probably making sense of what had happened themselves with the filter team and investigator one from the Bureau of Prisons who obtained this material from Sean Combs' jail cell. But look, interesting development. We're going to cover more on Friday. Elizabeth Milner, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
Now, again, we're going to be on Fridays when we're going to have this bail hearing, and we're going to do the same kind of coverage because I think that is going to be really interesting. I want to get some final perspective right now from Natalie Winningham-Burrell, criminal defense attorney. Your final reaction to the day's events and also what we can anticipate on Friday with the issue of bail.
I think that we should prepare to be surprised with bail on Friday. Because although it is more likely than not that Diddy will remain to be held, he now has an avenue for release. And my major impression here is that the prosecution made a huge mistake in intercepting that attorney-client privilege communication. They could have had that clean team do the raid and then hand over all the items to the court so the court can make a determination of what's attorney-client privilege. They didn't do that. And I think that's why Elizabeth is expressing that they were kind of caught flat-footed. They made a big, big strategic error here by doing that. And so I do think there will be some more ripple effects from that.
And clearly it is at least a little bit negatively impacted them going into the bail motion on Friday. Natalie Winningham-Burrell, thank you so much for coming on. Always great seeing you.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for having me.
Now, as I said, we're going to cover this on Friday, but before I do, I have a very special announcement for you as well. If you're looking for a deep dive on the Sean Diddy Combs case, well, guess what? You need to be subscribed to Wondery Plus because Law&Crime is going to be launching a brand new podcast series called The Rise and Fall of Diddy. It launches on December 4th, and guess who it's hosted by? Me. Yep, very excited to be a part of it, so hopefully you can check that out. Again, on Friday is when we expect this bail motion hearing. We're going to do the same thing. We'll do live coverage, take your questions, take your thoughts. Again, thank you everybody for submitting them on YouTube. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you to Elizabeth. We will be covering every aspect of the Sean Diddy Combs case as it progresses on our live channel here on YouTube and also our various shows. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll see you next time.